Salams from the People's Dispatch studios here in New Delhi. You're watching the Daily Debrief with me, Siddhant Ani. It's an important day. China's President Xi Jinping is in Russia on an official state visit, the first by a Chinese leader since the war started over a year ago. Where we are focusing today on both the visit and what is likely to happen while Xi is in Moscow, as well as a new fillip for the anti-war movement in the United States. We're also looking at why farmers and workers in India are mobilizing at a massive scale in the coming weeks. First up, at a time when the US and its Western allies are attempting everything in their powers to intensify the isolation of Russia, including, of course, wide-ranging economic and trade sanctions, limited diplomatic interaction, as well as, of course, pouring billions of dollars worth of weapons and ammunition into Ukraine, Chinese President Xi Jinping is on an official state visit to Moscow in the hope of presenting the world with an alternative vision to how America views global events. China has maintained its neutrality in regard to the conflict and has made a point of letting us know that it is in fact Western weapons that are being used on the battlefield and not those manufactured in China. This is the first state visit, like I was saying earlier, since the war started and is likely to give the Chinese clarity on the Russian position, as well as Russia clarity on the role that China can play in the wider context of resolving the conflict. Abdul Rahman is with us in studio now to talk more about the visit and what might happen as a result of it. Abdul, the visit is likely to dominate the headlines and all sorts of analysis and opinion and commentary will come out in the next couple of days. As far as we're concerned, as far as you're concerned, how you're looking at it, why is this trip significant? It is, of course, the first trip that the Chinese leader is making to Russia since the war started. But beyond that, what is the significance of this visit?
Well, it is quite obvious that both Russia and China have a very long-standing relationship, quite close relationship. And in the context of the recent, you can say, attacks by the US, diplomatic or other economic attacks, both on Russia and China, it is quite obvious that they need to collaborate, particularly in the context that both of them have been linked in various platforms. And that basically makes it quite natural to assume that they will try to make it more stronger, more deeper, the relationship. So in that context, when we should also remember that within some days ago, a few days ago, Chinese government basically proposed a 12-point proposal, basically about finding some kind of resolution to the Ukrainian crisis, and that also needed kind of pursuance, and that is one of the reasons Xi Jinping is there in Moscow. Apart from that, there are different other geopolitical and bilateral consideration. One of them, of course, is the rising economic relationship between both China and Russia. Their trade stands at almost $200 billion. And particularly due to the sanctions, US sanctions on Russia, the potential of that trade growing further is there, and that needs to kind of sort it out, and that could be one of the reasons that he's there. Apart from that, as we discussed earlier, there is an attempt by the Chinese to kind of make greater global assertions in order to basically counter the rising attempts by the US and its allies to corner China. And Russia is a very significant player in both in terms of economic presence in the world politics and also in terms of its strategic strength. So, of course, all of these considerations will be part of this particular summit, which is going to happen, and this may lead to some kind of conclusions which will have significant implications on global politics in the coming days.
Right. Because the visit has just about gotten underway and we will get more information over the next couple of days, Abdul, and I'm sure you'll be back talking more about it later on in the week. But for now, if we look at it in the context of, for example, China's involvement between the Saudis and Iran in the recent past, and its role elsewhere as well from a diplomatic perspective. And here also, China seems the only outside sort of party that is engaged with trying to find a way towards peace, which
Exactly.
which the US and NATO and its allies have not so far demonstrated any inclination towards. In that context, are the Chinese, you think, is China looking at it as sort of a way to also tell the world that there is a different perspective to global politics than what the Western media tells us?
Of course. In fact, one of the policy orientations which Xi Jinping has pushed in last few months at least is presenting a worldview which is quite different from the Western perspective, which is primarily based on imposing certain quote-unquote values all across the globe. Chinese perspective is quite different from it. They are trying to portray that in the global politics there cannot be one way of life, one way of doing politics, and one way of also organizing the economic structure of the society. Each and every country needs to have that independence to decide what kind of political structure, what kind of value system, what kind of economic system that country wants.
Yeah.
And that is one world perspective which basically China is pushing for last few months at least. And given the fact that Russia is attacked because of certain political understanding in the Western countries, it being there is a kind of attempt to portray as a totalitarian, authoritarian, dictatorial system based on oligarchy and so forth, so on and so forth. China is trying to kind of put a perspective in which such value judgments should not decide the relationship in the global politics, the status in the global politics. And that, of course, is one of the major thing which basically will come out during the summit. Apart from that, one should also remember that the Russia and China have tried to create a global partnership, which basically is reflected in what you were rightly pointing out, what China did with Iran, and what it is trying to do with the other Gulf countries in West Asian region, in Africa, and in other parts of the world. And it's thing that the collaborating with Russians in all these regions will be significant, will be important for kind of create pushing away all kinds of perceptions where one particular country, the US and its allies, are basically the superpower, and there is no other country, no other grouping which can kind of create an alternative. So this partnership is basically portrayed, there is an attempt to portray it as an alternative set of countries which are, so China is not alone, there are other countries which are together to basically challenge the hegemonic presence of certain countries, which basically tries to dictate terms
all around the world. All right, thanks very much, Abdul, and we're looking forward to hearing more from you on what is likely to be an interesting and important visit, even though we might not see the impact of it immediately, but I think in the longer run it will have a significant sort of impact. We'll move on to our final next story actually. The anti-war movement in the United States, diverse as it is, counts among its ranks of organizers and collectives. Those who believe that the war in Ukraine that we were talking about earlier is not just unilateral Russian aggression, despite what US politicians and the press might be saying. Instead, they argue it's a product of decades of NATO provocation by expanding eastward. This is, of course, despite promises from the United States to the Soviet Union back in the day, back in 1990 that is, that, and I quote, "Not an inch of NATO's present military jurisdiction will spread in the eastern direction." The war in Ukraine has, of course, taken hundreds of lives, thousands of lives, and plunged the world into crisis. It will cost also taxpayers and the public in the US over $100 billion. On Saturday, over 200 organizations and prominent figures in the anti-war movement marched to make these points loud and clear. Natalia Marquez was there and joins us now via video conference for all the details. Hi, Natalia. Good to have you with us. Looks like the sun is just about coming out where you are. It's been a busy weekend for you. You were covering the sort of the march marking 20 years since the start of the Iraq War, and of course, also perhaps in a way charting the future of the anti-war movement in the United States. Tell us how things went. Who were the organizations participating in this quite massive march? And what were some of the conversations that were going on the ground, the messages being sent to those in positions of power in the United States and elsewhere in the world?
Yeah, so this Saturday there was a really incredible peace rally, a rally for peace in Ukraine, that really connected the issue of the Iraq War, which, I mean, yesterday actually was the 20th anniversary of the 2003 US invasion of Iraq. Really connected the Iraq War and the history of the anti-war movement in the US to the current war going on now, which is not really a connection that many are making, especially since the argument, the pro-war argument is that Putin is waging this war, not the United States. But this rally and its organizers are really saying, there's so much money being funneled into Ukraine by the United States. This is a war of NATO aggression. There's a lot of anti-NATO messaging in the rally, and it's our responsibility as people in the United States to protest and to show that there's really not very much popular support for the war in Ukraine. There were very many organizations that participated, and I think something that was really remarkable is the different struggles that were connected to the anti-war issue. People came from as far away as Guam to this rally, and as close by as like Northwest DC. So people were connecting the issues of Black liberation in the United States, water protectors in Hawaii, anti-imperialists in Haiti, all these different struggles, uplifting the global South, especially, that are not normally uplifted in the United States at all, whether or not within the anti-war movement or out of it. And I think that it was a really important moment. A lot of people in the US don't really know much about what's going on in Eritrea, for example, what's going on in Hawaii, what's going on in Haiti. There was a teach-in at the end of the rally in First Presbyterian Church where I think a lot of people learned for the first time about all these different struggles. Um, and I think that really strengthens the movement at the end of the day.
How do you see sort of this momentum building up, Natalia? And is there actually, since what we've seen from the political establishment is kind of bipartisan support for more military aid, more money being put into Ukraine consistently, we're talking at a time when, of course, Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, is in Moscow on a state visit, perhaps presenting a proposal or the beginnings of some kind of dialogue, hopefully then towards peace. Do you see over the next months, weeks, and months, sort of more political pressure being put on the United States and its leadership to kind of endorse those moves and to sort of stop, instead of funding the war, moving towards a dialogue and negotiation?
Well, it's interesting because in the US, definitely the Democratic and Republican establishment are both in agreement that they need to send more weapons and more money to Ukraine. But there's been a growing left anti-war movement, and there's actually been a lot of far right and somewhat anti-war sentiment. There are a lot of pundits and commentators on the very far right that are very against sending any more weapons or money to Ukraine. I think what they're sensing is that there actually is an opening for, you know, people to not support the war in Ukraine and trying to sort of take advantage of that. So I think it's really important that the left intervened in the form of this rally into the anti-war movement, so it's not completely dominated by the far right. Because at the end of the day, there's so many different issues that the far right will never uplift. That really should be connected in terms of struggles. So it's very good, that like this was a very strong showing of the left into the anti-war movement. I mean, there have been many left-wing anti-war rallies in the US, but this was, a really good step forward. And so, I think it might be a little too early to tell what the outcomes are going to be in terms of, popular support for a left-wing anti-war platform. But I think that this rally united a lot of different struggles, a lot of different organizations, and people who follow any of those issues from, Cop City in Atlanta to Eritrea to Palestine are going to now be put onto this idea that there should be negotiations in Ukraine. We should stop sending weapons, and we need to fund our people here in the US before we fund weapons in Ukraine. So yeah, I mean, I think it's quite a positive thing. I think it's interesting geopolitically speaking that China is willing to negotiate and the US is not. That not only is Putin indicted by the ICC, which is a separate issue from the US, but also, I mean, Biden simply won't negotiate with him. It's not interested in doing so, unless, of course, there's enough of a push from the grassroots to force him to. But I mean, China is very much ahead of the game in this. China just recently negotiated normalization of relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and that's something that the United States was not willing to do, right? So I think it's good that they're occupying this sort of like role on the geopolitical stage of peace and negotiations, and I think it's time for the US to do the same.
All right. Thanks very much for that, Natalia. And like you said, hopefully, this will bring these very diverse movements or sets of movements from so many different parts of the world together and help people also connect the dots between, between their specific struggles and the reason for their struggles and understand those who are sort of perpetuating the conditions in which they live and have to face those kind of circumstances. Thanks again for joining us.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for having me.
And finally, India's farmers are on the streets once again, agitating, as they have been year after year in the recent past, for the government to listen to their demands and to treat agriculture, a sector on which a majority of India's workforce is engaged and on which we all depend, and the needs of farmers with the urgency and respect that they deserve. Over the next few days, the country will witness a series of mobilizations emphasizing these needs. Some of them are long-standing, like a minimum support price for agricultural produce. Others are more the immediate result of the anti-farmer policies of the Narendra Modi-led BJP government. The movement is also seeking to go beyond the strictly agricultural and present a joint platform with the country's working class, who are also facing tremendous economic hardship and a constant assault on their rights. NewsClick's Pragya Singh is with us in studio for more. Pragya, in Maharashtra, we saw the sort of calling off of a long march by farmers, which was underway to the state capital, Mumbai, after the government there agreed to sort of listen to their demands and perhaps even implement them. But this is a story that's been going on for some time, as you were pointing out to me, and the government regularly agrees to demands, including the long-standing demand for a minimum support price that farmers across India have been agitating, and the agitation continues. So despite maybe minor victories, it's a struggle that has been on for some time and will continue to intensify. Tell us what the situation is today and what we are expecting over the next few days.
Siddhant, there's actually a coming together of a variety of forces which represent peasants, which represent workers and farmers, cultivators of every kind in India. So what we saw happen in Maharashtra has happened before. There are a variety of pending demands that the left unions and the farmers unions across the spectrum have, except for the ruling party, have actually been raising. This intensified after 2018 in particular, because that's when really the farm incomes dipped to levels which were below sustenance for the farmers, and you also had wider economic challenges come in. So in Maharashtra, the state government has said that they will fulfill all the demands, which include giving a legal guarantee of some sort to what kind of payment farmers get for their produce.
Right.
The interesting part of these mobilizations, there are actually three happening. One was the one you mentioned, the Farmers' Long March. The other is by a joint forum of all the unions across the spectrum, across the country, mostly concentrated in the northern states, which are primarily agricultural states, where the wheat and rice, the staple crops, are produced. Right. And the third is another joint forum, sort of an umbrella organization of left and other organizations, which have combined together the farmers and the workers to raise together separate sets of demands which are now overlapping.
Right.
So, the primary demands, there are about 20 demands in all if you sum them all up together, but the primary one is they spill over into non-agricultural areas. For example, they want the government to stop hiring soldiers for the army under the new policy, which gives them temporary employment, because the farmers' children tend to become soldiers in the military. So, that's one basic thing, that if you're cutting short their period of employment, you're only adding to unemployment in the country, you're giving them unsecure jobs. And today, most of Indian farmers cannot sustain themselves unless they have an income from another source, a shop somewhere, either in the village or in the city, a job in the service economy, which is unstable, sort of a service delivery boy or a delivery agent for some courier company or food delivery company. These are not jobs you can rely on to actually lift the prospects of a family or a village.
Household,
You're simply, surviving from day to day, which they were doing on the farms anyway. So this is why, this is primarily the demand of people related to agriculture, which has spilled over to what can be seen as non-agricultural demands as well. On behalf of the workers, the primary demand is to undo the 4 labor codes, which rejig everything that we have had so far in India in terms of social security, in terms of pension, in terms of which kind of companies qualify to give their workers some sort of social security. So this is the broad lay of the land.
Thanks very much for that update, Pragya, and we'll hopefully, once all of this mobilizations come to an end, we'll get an update in terms of both what the demands finally were, how they were articulated, and of course what the government response has been. And with that, we also bring this episode of Daily Debrief to a close. Thank you very much, as always, for watching. We invite you to head to our website, peoplesdispatch.org, for more details on these stories, as well as all of the other work we do. Don't also forget to give us a follow on the social media platform of your choice. We'll see you tomorrow. Until then, goodbye.